The silence on the rifle range was deafening. 200 Marines stood watching as a young woman stepped up to the firing line, her hands steady despite the weight of every doubt-filled stare burning into her back. The target sat 500 yards away, a distance that had humbled seasoned marksmen and crushed the dreams of countless recruits. "She'll never make it," whispered a drill instructor to his colleague, shaking his head as he watched her adjust her stance. These long-distance shots separate the real shooters from the wannabes. What none of them knew was that this moment had been 23 years in the making. They didn't know about the countless hours she'd spent in her grandfather's backyard, learning to breathe between heartbeats. They couldn't see the calloused hands that told the story of 1,000 practice sessions, or feel the determination that had carried her through every obstacle life had thrown her way. In the next 60 seconds, everything they thought they knew about limitations, about what was possible, about who belonged in their ranks, would be shattered by the crack of a single rifle shot that would echo far beyond that sunny afternoon at Camp Pendleton. This is the story of Sarah Martinez, the woman who didn't just prove them wrong. She rewrote the record books and changed the Marine Corps forever. Sarah Martinez was 7 years old when she first held a rifle, though it wasn't the kind of moment you might expect. Standing in her grandfather's modest backyard in Tucson, Arizona, the old Winchester felt impossibly heavy in her small hands. Her grandfather, Miguel Santos, had been a Marine sniper in Vietnam, and his weathered face carried stories he rarely shared with adults, let alone children. "Mija, shooting isn't about the gun," he told her that first day, his Spanish accent still thick after 40 years in America. "It's about understanding yourself, your breath, your heartbeat, your mind. The rifle is just the tool." Sarah's parents had divorced the year before, and she was spending the summer with her grandfather while her mother worked double shifts at the hospital. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but as weeks turned to months, it became clear that this quiet man with steady hands was exactly what the angry, confused little girl needed. Miguel had noticed something special about Sarah from the beginning. While other children her age were fidgety and impatient, she possessed an unusual ability to focus. When he taught her to shoot at tin cans lined up on his back fence, she would stand perfectly still for minutes at a time, breathing slowly, waiting for the moment that felt right. "You have the gift, Mija," he would tell her after she knocked down can after can with his old .22 rifle. "But gifts mean nothing without work." And work she did. Every day after school, Sarah would walk the mile and a half to her grandfather's house instead of going home to the empty apartment where her mother wouldn't return until late at night. Miguel would have milk and cookies waiting, along with a shooting lesson that was really a life lesson in disguise. He taught her that precision came from patience, that accuracy was born from discipline, and that true marksmanship was 90% mental. They would spend hours in meditation-like preparation before ever touching a rifle. Sarah learned to slow her breathing until she could feel the space between heartbeats, to quiet her mind until the only thing that existed was her, the rifle, and the target. By age 10, Sarah could consistently hit targets at distances that amazed the other men at the local shooting range where Miguel sometimes took her on weekends. The old-timers would watch in silence as this small girl with pigtails would step up to the line and methodically punch holes in the center of targets that grown men struggled with. "That little girl shoots better than half the guys in our hunting club," she overheard one man tell another. The comment filled her with pride, but Miguel always reminded her to stay humble. "Skill without character is dangerous," he would say. "Always remember that this ability comes with responsibility." The lessons went beyond shooting. Miguel taught Sarah about respect, for the weapon, for the sport, and for life itself. He made her understand that marksmanship was not about violence or showing off, but about discipline, focus, and the pursuit of perfection in a craft that demanded everything you had. When Sarah turned 13, her mother remarried, and the family moved to San Diego. The goodbye with her grandfather was heartbreaking, but he made her promise to never stop practicing what he had taught her. "The Marines will find you someday, Mija," he said with a knowing smile as he hugged her goodbye. "When they do, you show them what a Santos can do." In San Diego, Sarah joined her high school's competitive shooting team, though she had to fight for the opportunity. The coach initially refused to let her try out, claiming that girls didn't have the upper body strength for serious competition shooting. It took 3 weeks of persistent requests and, finally, a demonstration of her skills before he reluctantly allowed her to join. Once on the team, Sarah quickly became their star performer. Her teammates, initially skeptical and sometimes hostile, gradually came to respect her abilities. She won regional championships and set state records, always thinking of her grandfather's words about character being more important than skill. During her senior year, a Marine Corps recruiter visited her school for a career fair. When he heard about Sarah's shooting accomplishments, he was intrigued but skeptical. Female Marines were still relatively rare, and female Marines in combat-related fields were almost unheard of. "Have you ever considered serving your country?" he asked her during their conversation. Sarah thought of her grandfather, of his stories about honor and service, of the quiet pride in his eyes when he told her about his time in the Corps. She thought about the discipline and purpose the Marines might offer, the chance to use her skills in service of something greater than herself. "Yes, sir," she answered. "I have." The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, arranged for Sarah to visit a local Marine base where she could see marksmanship training in action. What she witnessed that day both inspired and intimidated her. The precision required was beyond anything she had experienced in civilian competition. The pressure was intense, and the standards were unforgiving. But watching the Marine snipers work, seeing their dedication and skill, Sarah felt something click into place. This was where she belonged. This was why her grandfather had spent all those hours teaching her, why he had instilled in her the values of discipline and service. When Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked if she was serious about enlisting, Sarah didn't hesitate. She was 18 years old, a high school graduate with a full scholarship to study engineering at UC San Diego. Her mother begged her to reconsider, to take the safe path of college and a comfortable civilian life. But Sarah had made her decision. 3 months after graduation, she stood at the recruit depot at Parris Island, South Carolina, beginning 13 weeks of training that would test every lesson her grandfather had taught her about discipline, focus, and never giving up. The other recruits looked at her with mixtures of curiosity and doubt. She was one of only 6 women in a company of 60 recruits, and the only one who had listed infantry as her preferred military occupational specialty. The drill instructors made it clear that they didn't expect her to succeed. "This isn't summer camp, recruit," drill instructor Sergeant Williams told her on the first day. "This is the Marine Corps, and we don't lower our standards for anybody." Sarah simply replied, "I wouldn't want you to, sir." What followed were weeks of physical and mental challenges that pushed every recruit to their breaking point. Sarah struggled with some of the physical requirements. She was strong for her size, but the Corps demanded a level of strength and endurance that didn't come naturally to her slight frame. But when it came to marksmanship training, Sarah was in her element. The first time she stepped onto the rifle range at Parris Island, she felt her grandfather's presence with her. The familiar weight of the rifle, the discipline of controlled breathing, the meditation-like focus required for precision shooting. It all felt like coming home. Her drill instructors noticed immediately. On the qualification day, when most recruits were struggling to meet minimum standards, Sarah shot a perfect score. Then, she did it again. And again. Sergeant Williams pulled her aside after the third perfect qualification score. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, Martinez?" "My grandfather taught me, sir. He was a Marine sniper in Vietnam." For the first time since she had arrived at Parris Island, Sergeant Williams smiled. "Well, I'll be damned. The Corps runs in the family." As graduation approached, Sarah received orders that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of being assigned to a typical Marine occupational specialty, she was being sent to the School of Infantry, the first step toward becoming a Marine marksman. The night before graduation, she called her grandfather. Now in his 70s and in declining health, Miguel's voice was weak, but his pride was unmistakable. "I always knew this day would come, Mija," he told her. "You carry our family's honor now. Make me proud." "I will, abuelo," Sarah promised. "I'll show them what a Santos can do." The School of Infantry at Camp Pendleton, California, was a different world from the structured environment of Parris Island. Here, newly minted Marines learned the specific skills they would need for their military occupational specialties. For Sarah, this meant advanced marksmanship training, combat tactics, and the beginning of what she hoped would be a path toward becoming a designated marksman. She arrived at Camp Pendleton on a scorching August morning in 2018, one of only 3 women in a class of 45 Marines. The other 2 women were assigned to logistics and administration tracks. Sarah was the only female heading into infantry training, a fact that made her simultaneously proud and nervous. Her first instructor was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thompson, a 20-year veteran with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for being one of the finest marksmen in the Corps. He had trained hundreds of Marines over his career, but never a woman in infantry skills. Martinez, front and center, he called out on their first day. Sarah stepped forward, standing at attention before the grizzled instructor who looked like he could bench press a truck. "I've read your file," Thompson said, circling her slowly. "Perfect scores at Paris Island, state champion in high school. Grandfather was a sniper. Impressive on paper." He stopped in front of her, his steel gray eyes boring into hers. "But paper doesn't mean anything out here. This isn't about hitting bullseyes on a nice, clean range with perfect conditions. This is about hitting targets that are shooting back, in the rain, in the dark, when you're tired and scared and everything is going wrong." Sarah kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. We'll see what you're made of, Martinez. I hope for your sake, and the sake of the Marines who might depend on you someday, that you're as good as your record suggests." The training was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. At Paris Island, marksmanship had been taught in controlled conditions with standardized procedures. Here, they learned to shoot while moving, while under stress, while simulating combat conditions. They practiced in all weather, at all hours, from every conceivable position and distance. Sarah's fellow Marines watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Many of them had never trained alongside a woman in a combat role, and some made no secret of their doubts. "No offense, Martinez," said Lance Corporal Jake Morrison during their second week, "but when things get real, are you going to be able to handle it? I mean, you're tough for a girl, but this isn't girl stuff we're training for." Sarah had learned not to rise to such bait. Instead, she let her performance speak for itself. On the rifle range, she consistently outscored not just Morrison but most of the other Marines in their class. When they practiced urban warfare scenarios, she demonstrated the same calm focus under pressure that her grandfather had instilled in her years earlier. But it was during their first field exercise that Sarah truly proved herself to her skeptical classmates. The exercise simulated a reconnaissance mission in hostile territory. The Marines had to move through several miles of rough terrain, establish observation posts, and engage targets at various distances while avoiding detection by the opposing force. Sarah was assigned as the designated marksman for her squad, a role that required her to provide precision fire support while the rest of her team maneuvered. The mission was designed to be challenging even for experienced Marines, and several squads had already failed when it was Sarah's team's turn. The exercise began before dawn. Sarah's squad moved through the California hills with practiced stealth, communicating through hand signals and staying low to avoid being spotted by the exercise controllers acting as enemy forces. When they reached their first objective, Sarah found herself facing a shot that would have been challenging even under ideal conditions. The target was a mannequin representing an enemy sniper positioned 400 yards away on a ridge line. The wind was gusting unpredictably, and Sarah had to account for both the distance and the movement of air across the valley between her position and the target. She settled into her prone shooting position, feeling the familiar rhythm of controlled breathing that her grandfather had taught her. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly, but the wind made calculations difficult. She spent several minutes observing the movement of grass and leaves, building a mental picture of the wind patterns. "Martinez, what's the holdup?" whispered her squad leader, Corporal Davis. "We need to take this shot and move." Sarah ignored the pressure, continuing her methodical preparation. She thought of her grandfather's words about patience being the foundation of precision. Finally, sensing a lull in the wind, she fired. The shot was perfect. The target dropped immediately, and the exercise controllers confirmed the hit over the radio. Sarah's squad moved to their next objective, but word of her shot was already spreading among the other Marines. As the day progressed, Sarah's performance continued to impress both her teammates and the instructors observing the exercise. She made several more long-range shots under difficult conditions, each one demonstrating not just accuracy, but the kind of tactical awareness that separated good shooters from great ones. The final challenge of the exercise came near sunset. Sarah's squad was pinned down by simulated enemy fire, and their only escape route was blocked by multiple targets at various ranges. Sarah needed to eliminate 3 targets in rapid succession, shots of 200, 350, and 450 yards, to clear the way for her squad. This was exactly the kind of scenario that Gunnery Sergeant Thompson had been talking about on their first day. Multiple targets, time pressure, squad mates depending on her, and the stress of simulated combat conditions. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but forced herself to maintain the breathing discipline her grandfather had taught her. The first shot was straightforward, 200 yards with minimal wind. She dropped the target easily and immediately shifted to the second position. The 350-yard shot required more calculation, and she had to compensate for both wind and the slightly uphill angle. She took her time, despite the urgent whispers from her squad mates, and fired. Another direct hit. The final shot was the most challenging. At 450 yards, with a crosswind that seemed to shift every few seconds, she had to read the conditions perfectly to make the shot. Sarah settled into position, slowed her breathing, and entered the almost meditative state that had become second nature to her over the years. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly, but her calculations had to account for wind, distance, and the fact that she was now shooting from a different elevation than her previous shots. She made micro-adjustments to her scope, shifted her position slightly to better brace against the rocky ground, and waited for the right moment. When it came, she fired without hesitation. The shot flew true, striking the target center mass. The exercise controllers confirmed the hit, and Sarah's squad was able to complete their mission successfully. That evening, as the Marines gathered for their after-action review, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson addressed the group. He rarely handed out praise, and his evaluation sessions were typically focused on mistakes and areas for improvement. Today, several of you learned something important, he began, his voice carrying across the assembled Marines. You learned that marksmanship isn't about how much you can bench press or how loud you can yell. It's about discipline, patience, and the ability to perform under pressure. He looked directly at Sarah. Martinez, that final sequence of shots was some of the finest marksmanship I've seen from a new Marine. You demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical awareness and technical skill that we're trying to develop in all of you. The acknowledgement from Thompson carried weight that went far beyond the words themselves. He was known for his exacting standards and his reluctance to praise anyone who hadn't truly earned it. For the other Marines in Sarah's class, his words were a clear message that she belonged among them. Lance Corporal Morrison, who had questioned Sarah's abilities just weeks earlier, approached her after the debrief. Martinez, I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I was wrong about you. What you did today, that was Marine Corps marksmanship at its finest. Sarah accepted his apology graciously, but she knew that this was just the beginning. Her success in this exercise had earned her respect from her peers and instructors, but it had also raised expectations. She was no longer just trying to prove that she belonged. She was now expected to maintain a standard of excellence that would inspire and challenge everyone around her. As the weeks continued, Sarah's reputation as an exceptional marksman spread beyond her immediate training class. Other instructors began visiting the range when she was practicing, curious to see the woman who was setting new standards for marksmanship performance. Her scores consistently placed her at the top of every evaluation, but, more importantly, she demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking and leadership potential that the Corps valued in its designated marksmen. She helped struggling classmates improve their technique, shared insights about reading wind conditions and calculating range, and maintained the calm professionalism that had become her trademark. Near the end of their training cycle, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. Martinez, I've been in this Corps for 20 years, and I've trained some exceptional Marines. You have the potential to be something special. He handed her a packet of papers. I'm recommending you for advanced marksmanship training. If you accept, you'll be going to Scout Sniper School after you complete your initial assignment. It's a challenging program, and the failure rate is high, but I believe you have what it takes. Sarah looked at the papers, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Scout Sniper School was the elite of Marine marksmanship training. It would be the ultimate test of everything her grandfather had taught her and everything she had learned since joining the Corps. Gunnery Sergeant, I won't let you down, she said. Thompson smiled. I know you won't, Martinez. I know you won't. As their training at the School of Infantry concluded, Sarah received her first duty assignment. She would be deployed to Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, where she would serve as a designated marksman with the 2nd Marine Division. It was a position that would test all of her skills and prepare her for the challenges ahead. On her last night at Camp Pendleton, Sarah called her grandfather. His health had continued to decline, but his voice still carried the pride and strength that had shaped her childhood. How did it go, Mija? He asked. Better than I hoped, Abuelo. They're sending me to sniper school. There was a long pause, and Sarah could hear the emotion in her grandfather's breathing. Your grandmother would have been so proud, he finally said. I am so proud. You've honored our family and the Corps. As Sarah prepared for her move to North Carolina and the challenges ahead, she carried with her the lessons of the past months. She had proven that she could compete with the best Marines in marksmanship and tactical skills. She had earned the respect of her peers and instructors through performance rather than politics. But, most importantly, she had remained true to the values her grandfather had instilled in her years earlier. Skill with character, discipline with humility, strength with compassion. These were the qualities that would define her not just as a Marine, but as a leader who could inspire others to achieve excellence. Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, was shrouded in morning fog when Sarah arrived for the beginning of Scout Sniper School in March 2019. She had spent 6 months at Camp Lejeune honing her skills as a designated marksman, but nothing had prepared her for the intimidating atmosphere of the most elite marksmanship training the Corps offered. The Scout Sniper Basic course was legendary for its difficulty. Of the 24 Marines who began each class, typically fewer than half would graduate. The training was designed to break down even the most confident marksmen and rebuild them as precision specialists capable of operating independently in the most challenging environments. Sarah was the only woman in her class, a distinction that brought both additional scrutiny and internal pressure. She had heard whispers that some instructors believed the Corps was making a mistake by allowing women into sniper training, that the physical and mental demands were simply too great. Her head instructor was Chief Warrant Officer David Chun, a legend in the sniper community with confirmed kills across 3 combat deployments. Chun had a reputation for being absolutely uncompromising in his standards, regardless of a student's background or connections. Ladies and gentlemen, Chun addressed the class on their first day. You are here because someone believes you have the potential to become Scout snipers. I am here to prove them wrong or make them right. Most of you will fail, not because you lack courage or dedication, but because this job requires a level of precision and mental discipline that few people possess. His eyes found Sarah in the group. This course doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your previous accomplishments. It only cares about whether you can deliver accurate fire under impossible conditions and gather intelligence that keeps Marines alive. If you can't do that, you don't belong here. The first weeks of training focused on fundamental marksmanship skills that went far beyond what Sarah had learned in her previous training. Here, they learned to calculate distance using mathematical formulas, to read wind patterns like a meteorologist, and to account for factors like temperature, humidity, and even the rotation of the Earth in their shooting calculations. The academic portion was surprisingly challenging. Sarah found herself studying late into the night, memorizing ballistics tables, learning to use sophisticated range-finding equipment, and mastering the complex mathematics involved in long-range precision shooting. But it was the fieldwork that truly tested every student's limits. They practiced concealment techniques that required remaining motionless for hours at a time, often in uncomfortable positions and harsh weather. They learned to move through terrain without leaving any trace of their passage, to observe and record enemy activities with photographic precision, and to extract themselves from hostile areas without being detected. Sarah's background in patient, disciplined shooting served her well in these exercises, but she struggled with some of the physical demands. The ghillie suit construction and stalking exercises required a level of strength and endurance that challenged her smaller frame. More than once, she found herself questioning whether she truly belonged in this elite program. The turning point came during the 4th week of training, during an exercise known as the unknown distance range. Students were required to engage targets at various ranges without being told the distances, requiring them to use all of their observational and mathematical skills to make accurate shots. The morning was overcast with a steady crosswind that made conditions particularly challenging. Sarah was paired with Lance Corporal Kevin Torres, a cocky Marine from Texas who had made several disparaging comments about having a woman in the class. "Hope you can keep up, Martinez," Torres said as they moved to their assigned position. "This isn't like the nice, controlled ranges you're used to." Sarah ignored the comment and began her systematic assessment of the shooting environment. She observed the movement of grass and leaves to gauge wind direction and speed at various distances, used her range-finding equipment to estimate distances to reference points, and made careful notes about lighting conditions that might affect her shots. The first target appeared at what Sarah estimated to be approximately 300 yards. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope accordingly, and fired. The target dropped immediately, confirming her hit. Torres, meanwhile, was rushing through his preparations, eager to prove his superiority. His first shot missed completely, but the second, stronger, and more accurate, shot landed and his second was only a marginal hit. As the exercise continued, Sarah's methodical approach continued to pay off while Torres became increasingly frustrated. By the end of the session, Sarah had scored hits on 7 out of 8 targets, including a particularly challenging 600-yard shot in swirling wind conditions. Torres had managed only 3 confirmed hits, despite his boastful confidence. Chief Warrant Officer Chun, who had been observing the exercise, approached their position as they were packing their equipment. "Torres, your performance today was unacceptable," he said bluntly. "You let ego override proper procedure, and, in a real scenario, that would get Marines killed. You're on academic probation as of now." He turned to Sarah. "Martinez, that was textbook precision shooting. Your preparation was thorough, your calculations were accurate, and your shot placement was consistent. This is exactly the standard we're looking for." The public recognition from Chun marked a shift in how Sarah's classmates viewed her. Torres, chastened by his poor performance, began asking for her advice on wind reading and range estimation. Other students who had been skeptical started including her in study groups and seeking her input on technical problems. But the real test was still ahead. The culminating exercise of sniper school was a week-long field training exercise that would test every skill they had learned. Students would be inserted into realistic combat scenarios where they would have to navigate enemy territory, establish concealed observation posts, gather intelligence, and engage targets at extreme distances. Sarah was assigned to work with Marine Corporal Anthony Rivera, a quiet professional from Puerto Rico who had consistently performed well throughout the training. Their mission was to infiltrate an area controlled by the opposing force, establish an observation post overlooking a simulated enemy compound, and engage specific high-value targets when the opportunity presented itself. The insertion took place at night, with Sarah and Rivera moving several miles through dense forest to reach their objective area. They carried everything they would need for a week of independent operation, including specialized sniper rifles, surveillance equipment, communications gear, and enough food and water to sustain them without resupply. Finding the right location for their observation post required careful analysis of terrain, fields of fire, concealment options, and escape routes. Sarah's attention to detail proved invaluable as they selected a position that provided excellent views of the target area while remaining virtually invisible to enemy observation. The construction of their hide site took most of the second day. Using natural materials and specialized camouflage techniques, they built a concealed position that would allow them to observe and shoot while remaining undetected. The work was physically demanding and required absolute precision. Any mistake could compromise their position and result in mission failure. Once established in their hide, Sarah and Rivera settled into a routine of continuous observation. They documented the movements and activities of the opposing force, identifying key personnel and patterns of behavior that could be exploited. The work required intense concentration and attention to detail, often for hours at a time, without any apparent activity to observe. On the 4th day of the exercise, their patience was rewarded. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target would be visiting the compound, and Sarah and Rivera were authorized to engage if the opportunity presented itself. The target appeared just before noon, a figure in distinctive clothing who matched the description they had been given. The shot would be approximately 700 yards under challenging conditions. There was a moderate crosswind, and the target would only be exposed for a brief window of time. Sarah had been designated as the primary shooter for this engagement. She settled into her firing position, made her calculations for wind and distance, and waited for the optimal moment. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly, but the wind conditions were constantly changing. Rivera, acting as her spotter, provided continuous updates on wind conditions and confirmed the target identification. "Wind is 8 to 10 miles per hour from the left," he whispered. "Target confirmed. You are cleared to engage when ready." Sarah controlled her breathing, feeling the familiar calm that came with complete focus. She had made shots like this before, but never under such realistic conditions with so much at stake. A miss would not only jeopardize the mission, but could result in her failing sniper school entirely. She waited for a lull in the wind, made a final adjustment to her scope, and fired. The shot flew true, striking the target precisely where she had aimed. The exercise controllers immediately confirmed the hit, and Sarah and Rivera began their planned withdrawal from the area. The exfiltration proved to be as challenging as the initial infiltration. With the opposing force now actively searching for them, Sarah and Rivera had to use all of their concealment and evasion skills to reach their extraction point without being detected. They moved only at night, covering their tracks carefully and avoiding all established trails and roads. When they finally reached the extraction point after 2 days of careful movement, they had successfully completed one of the most challenging exercises in Marine Corps training. The graduation ceremony for Scout Sniper School was held on a Friday morning in late June. Of the 24 Marines who had started the course, only 11 had successfully completed all requirements. Sarah was not only among the graduates, but had finished with the highest overall scores in both academic and practical evaluations. Chief Warrant Officer Chun addressed the graduating class with words that Sarah would remember for the rest of her career. You are now Marine Corps Scout Snipers, among the most elite marksmen in the world. You have earned the right to wear the crossed rifles and to call yourselves the finest precision shooters the Corps can produce. He paused, looking directly at each graduate. But remember this, your training is never finished. Every shot you take, every mission you complete, every life you touch will be a reflection of the standards we have instilled in you here. Don't ever let those standards slip. After the ceremony, Chin pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. Martinez, in 20 years of teaching this course, I've seen a lot of exceptional Marines come through here. What you've accomplished is truly remarkable, not because you're a woman, but because you've demonstrated the kind of precision and professionalism that defines the very best snipers. He handed her a set of orders. You're being assigned to 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton. They specifically requested a graduate from this class for a special assignment. I can't give you details, but I can tell you that you'll be working with some very serious professionals on some very important missions. That evening, Sarah called her grandfather to share the news of her graduation. Miguel's health had continued to decline, and she could hear the weakness in his voice, but his pride was unmistakable. You did it, Mija, he said softly. You became everything I knew you could be. Your parents, your grandmother, the whole family, we're all so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me, Abuelo, Sarah replied. Every lesson you gave me, every value you instilled, it all led to this moment. The lessons were just the beginning, Miguel replied. Now you get to teach others. Now you get to show the world what a Marine sniper looks like. As Sarah prepared for her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a 7-year-old girl learning to shoot tin cans in her grandfather's backyard, to a Marine Corps Scout sniper with orders, to one of the most prestigious units in the service, she had overcome every obstacle through discipline, dedication, and the unwavering belief that excellence was always possible. But, as she would soon discover, her greatest challenges and most remarkable achievements still lay ahead. The skills she had developed and the reputation she had earned were about to be tested in ways that would surprise everyone, including herself. Camp Pendleton's advanced marksmanship range was bustling with activity on a crisp September morning in 2019. Word had spread throughout the base that something special was planned for the day's training exercise, though few knew exactly what to expect. Senior officers from across the Marine Corps had gathered to observe what was being billed as a comprehensive evaluation of long-range marksmanship capabilities. Sarah Martinez arrived at the range before dawn, as was her habit. 3 months into her assignment with the 1st Marine Division's Specialized Reconnaissance Unit, she had established herself as an exceptional performer, but today would be different. Today, she would face the most challenging shooting scenarios that Marine Corps trainers could devise. The event had been organized by Colonel James Mitchell, a decorated veteran who was leading a comprehensive review of Marine Corps marksmanship training standards. Mitchell had heard reports about Sarah's extraordinary performance in various training exercises, but he remained skeptical about the stories that seemed almost too remarkable to be true. Martinez, Colonel Mitchell called as Sarah finished her equipment inspection. I've been hearing some interesting things about your shooting abilities. Today we're going to put those reports to the test. He gestured toward a group of senior Marines gathered near the range control tower. We have observers here from Marine Corps Headquarters, the School of Infantry, and several operational units. They're here to evaluate whether our current marksmanship standards are adequate for the challenges our Marines face in modern combat. Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar mix of nerves and excitement that came with high-stakes shooting. Yes, sir. What are today's requirements? We're going to run you through a series of shooting scenarios that represent the most challenging conditions our snipers might encounter in the field, Mitchell explained. Distances from 100 to 1,200 yards, various weather conditions, moving targets, and time constraints. The goal is to establish baseline performance standards for our most elite marksmen. What Mitchell didn't mention was that several of the observers were skeptical about reports of exceptional performance from a female sniper. Despite Sarah's proven track record, there remained institutional doubt about whether women could truly perform at the highest levels of precision marksmanship under pressure. The first station tested rapid precision shooting at moderate distances. Sarah was required to engage multiple targets at ranges from 100 to 400 yards within strict time limits, simulating the kind of quick reaction shooting that might be required in urban combat scenarios. As Sarah settled into position with her M40A5 sniper rifle, she felt the calm focus that had become second nature to her over the years. The first target appeared at 150 yards, a standard military silhouette that she engaged and dropped in less than 3 seconds. The second target, at 250 yards, required a slight adjustment for wind, but her shot was equally precise. The exercise continued with targets appearing at irregular intervals and various distances. Sarah's performance was flawless. Every shot found its mark, and her times were consistently faster than the established standards. The observers began taking notes and exchanging glances that suggested they were seeing something unusual. Master Gunnery Sergeant Williams, the senior enlisted advisor for Marine Corps marksmanship training, watched Sarah's performance with growing amazement. He had been training Marines for over 20 years and had seen exceptional shooters before, but Sarah's combination of speed and accuracy was remarkable. "Colonel, her shot placement is textbook perfect," Williams commented to Mitchell. "And these aren't lucky shots. There's a consistency here that indicates true mastery of fundamentals." The second station focused on long-range precision under adverse conditions. A fog machine had been deployed to simulate low visibility conditions, and targets were placed at distances ranging from 600 to 900 yards. Sarah would have to use her optical equipment and mathematical skills to engage targets that were barely visible through the artificial haze. This was the kind of shooting that separated good marksmen from exceptional ones. The targets were difficult to see clearly, the range calculations were complex, and there was little margin for error. Sarah approached the challenge methodically, using her spotting scope to study the conditions and make careful calculations before firing. Her first shot, at a target 650 yards away, struck center mass despite the challenging visibility. The second, at 750 yards, was equally accurate. As she progressed through the course of fire, Sarah demonstrated not just accuracy, but the kind of tactical patience that characterized elite snipers. "She's reading these conditions better than most of our instructors," observed Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun, one of the evaluators from Marine Corps headquarters. "That level of environmental awareness typically takes years to develop." The third station presented moving targets at various distances, requiring Sarah to calculate lead angles and timing while maintaining precision. Moving target engagement was considered one of the most difficult skills in precision marksmanship, requiring split-second decisions and perfect execution. The targets moved at different speeds and directions, some crossing her field of fire, others moving toward or away from her position. Sarah had to quickly assess the target's speed and direction, calculate the appropriate lead, and fire at precisely the right moment. Her performance continued to exceed expectations. Shot after shot found its mark, even on targets that were challenging experienced snipers. The observers were no longer just taking notes. They were witnessing something that would require them to reconsider their assumptions about marksmanship standards. As the morning progressed, word of Sarah's exceptional performance began spreading throughout the base. Marines who weren't officially part of the evaluation started finding reasons to visit the range area, curious to see the shooting that had senior officers talking in hushed, amazed tones. The culminating challenge was saved for last: extreme long-range precision shooting at the maximum distance the range could accommodate. Targets were placed at 1,000, 1,100, and 1,200 yards, distances that challenged even the most sophisticated equipment and most skilled marksmen. At these extreme ranges, minor variations in wind conditions, temperature, or humidity could cause even perfect shots to miss by significant margins. Success required not just technical skill but an almost intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental factors. Colonel Mitchell personally briefed Sarah on this final challenge. "Martinez, these shots represent the absolute limit of what we consider possible with standard Marine Corps equipment. Very few shooters have ever achieved consistent hits at these distances under field conditions." He paused, studying her face for any sign of nervousness or doubt. Are you confident you can perform at this level? Sarah looked downrange toward the distant targets, barely visible even through her high-powered scope. She thought of her grandfather's words about preparation and patience, about the thousands of hours of practice that had led to this moment. Sir, I'm ready, she replied simply. The first target was positioned at exactly 1,000 yards, a distance that required Sarah to account for significant bullet drop and wind drift. The mathematical calculations alone were complex, involving multiple variables that had to be precisely calculated and applied. Sarah spent several minutes observing wind conditions at various points along the bullet's path, studying the movement of grass and flags to build a complete picture of the air currents that would affect her shot. She made careful adjustments to her scope, double-checked her calculations, and settled into her shooting position. The shot felt perfect from the moment she pulled the trigger. The bullet flew true across the 1,000-yard distance, striking the target precisely where she had aimed. The observers confirmed the hit with something approaching disbelief. The 1,100-yard target presented additional challenges. At this distance, the target was barely visible even through her scope, appearing as little more than a dark spot against the hillside background. The wind conditions had shifted slightly, requiring new calculations and adjustments. Again, Sarah took her time with the preparation. She understood that rushing would only lead to mistakes, and at these extreme distances, there was no room for error. When she finally fired, the shot was another perfect hit, striking the target dead center. A murmur went through the group of observers. Hits at 1,100 yards were rare even among the most elite snipers, and Sarah had now made 2 consecutive shots at extreme range look routine. The final target, at 1,200 yards, represented the absolute limit of effective range for her rifle system. At this distance, the target was nearly invisible. The bullet would take well over a second to reach its destination, and any miscalculation would result in a complete miss. Sarah approached this final shot with the same methodical preparation she had used throughout the day. She spent even more time observing conditions, making calculations, and preparing her equipment. The mathematics involved were complex enough that she worked through them twice to ensure accuracy. The observers fell silent as Sarah settled into her final shooting position. Even the ambient noise of the base seemed to fade away as she controlled her breathing and found the perfect sight picture through her scope. The shot, when it came, felt like all the others, smooth, controlled, and precise. But the distance was so great that there was a noticeable delay before the sound of the bullet striking the target carried back to the firing line. When the range safety officer confirmed the hit over the radio, the reaction from the observers was immediate and unanimous. Spontaneous applause broke out among the group of senior Marines, something virtually unheard of during official evaluations. Colonel Mitchell approached Sarah as she began clearing her rifle. His expression was a mixture of amazement and respect that she had never seen from such a senior officer. Martinez, in 30 years of Marine Corps service, I have never seen a display of marksmanship like what you just demonstrated, he said. Those weren't just good shots. They were perfect shots under the most challenging conditions we could create. Master Gunnery Sergeant Williams was more direct in his assessment. That was the finest precision shooting I've ever witnessed. 3 shots at extreme range, 3 perfect hits. That's not just skill, that's mastery. But it was the comment from Lieutenant Colonel Chun that would follow Sarah for the rest of her career. Martinez, you just redefined what we consider possible in Marine Corps marksmanship. We're going to have to rewrite our training standards based on what you've shown us today. The unofficial consensus among the observers was that Sarah had not just met the existing standards for elite marksmanship. She had exceeded them by such a margin that new standards would need to be established. Her performance had been so exceptional that it challenged fundamental assumptions about the limits of precision shooting. Word of Sarah's record-breaking performance spread quickly throughout the Marine Corps community. Video footage of her shots, recorded for training purposes, would eventually become legendary among marksmanship instructors and students. Marines who had been there would tell the story for years, describing the day when a young sergeant redefined what was possible with a rifle. That evening, Sarah called her grandfather to share the news of her success. Miguel's health was now quite poor, but his voice carried unmistakable pride when she described the day's events. Mija, today you showed the world what I always knew was inside you, he said. Not just the skill, but the character. You represented our family and the Corps with honor. I wish you could have been there, Abuelo, Sarah replied. Every shot I took, I felt like you were there with me, guiding my hands and steadying my breathing. I was there, Miguel replied softly. Every lesson I taught you, every value I shared with you, they were all there in that rifle with you today. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, she reflected on the magnitude of what had happened. She had not only proven herself capable of exceptional marksmanship, but had done so in front of the most senior Marines in the Corps. The performance would open doors and create opportunities that she could hardly imagine. But, more importantly, she had honored the legacy of her grandfather and the traditions of the Marine Corps. She had shown that excellence was possible regardless of background or gender, that dedication and discipline could overcome any obstacle. The records she had set that day would stand for years to come. But Sarah understood that her greatest achievement was not the accuracy of her shots, but the example she had set for future Marines who might face their own doubts and challenges. She had proven that with enough preparation, patience, and determination, anything was possible. The Marine Corps Gazette article published 3 months after Sarah's record-breaking performance at Camp Pendleton carried a headline that would become part of Marine Corps lore. Redefining precision. How Sergeant Martinez changed Marine Corps marksmanship forever. But, for Sarah, reading about her achievements in the official Marine Corps publication felt surreal, like reading about someone else's life. She was sitting in her grandfather's hospital room in Tucson, having been granted emergency leave when Miguel's condition had suddenly worsened. The old Marine lay in the bed looking frail and tired, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence and quiet strength that had shaped Sarah's childhood. "Read it to me again, Mija," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the quiet hum of medical equipment. "The part about the 1,200-yard shot." Sarah cleared her throat and read from the magazine. Sergeant Martinez's final shot at 1,200 yards was described by observers as beyond exceptional and representative of the absolute pinnacle of Marine Corps marksmanship capability. The shot, made under challenging wind conditions with standard-issue equipment, has been officially recognized as the longest confirmed precision shot made during a Marine Corps training exercise. Miguel smiled, closing his eyes as if savoring the words. "Your grandmother would have been so proud. She always said you were destined for something special." The past several months had been a whirlwind for Sarah. The publicity from her record-setting performance had brought opportunities she had never expected. She had been invited to speak at the Marine Corps birthday ball, had been featured in recruiting materials, and had received personal commendations from the Commandant of the Marine Corps himself. More importantly, her performance had led to concrete changes in how the Marine Corps approached marksmanship training. The standards she had achieved were being incorporated into advanced training programs, and her techniques were being studied and taught to new generations of Marine snipers. But perhaps the most significant development had been her assignment to the Marine Corps Marksmanship Training Unit, where she would be responsible for developing new training methods and mentoring other exceptional shooters. It was a role that would allow her to pass on not just the technical skills she had mastered, but the values and discipline that had made her success possible. "Tell me about the young Marines you're training," Miguel said, opening his eyes again. "Are they learning the right lessons?" Sarah thought about her current students at Quantico, where she now spent most of her time developing and teaching advanced marksmanship curricula. The group included both men and women Marines from diverse backgrounds who had shown exceptional potential in their initial training. "They're good kids, Abuelo," she said. "Eager to learn, willing to work hard. Some of them remind me of myself when I was starting out, lots of natural ability, but needing to learn patience and discipline." She paused, thinking of Lance Corporal Rebecca Kim, a young woman from California whose shooting abilities were remarkable, but whose confidence had been shaken by instructors who doubted her potential. "There's one in particular, a young woman who shoots almost as well as I did at her age. But she's struggling with some of the same doubts I had." "And what are you teaching her?" Miguel asked. "The same things you taught me," Sarah replied. "That skill without character means nothing. That precision comes from patience. That excellence is earned through discipline, not luck." Miguel nodded approvingly. "Good. The technical things, anyone can teach. But the important lessons, those come from the heart." Over the following days, as Sarah spent time at her grandfather's bedside, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a confused 7-year-old learning to shoot tin cans to a Marine Corps instructor whose techniques were being studied and emulated throughout the service, she had traveled a path that seemed almost impossible in retrospect. The records she had set were already being challenged by new generations of Marines who had been inspired by her example. Just last month, a Marine at Camp Lejeune, had come within inches of matching her 1,200-yard shot. Rather than feeling threatened by the competition, Sarah was thrilled that her achievements had raised the bar for everyone. "You know what makes me most proud?" Miguel said during one of their conversations. "It's not the records or the recognition. It's that you've become a teacher, that you're passing on what you've learned to others." He was right, Sarah realized. The shooting achievements had been personally satisfying and professionally rewarding, but her work as an instructor had given her a sense of purpose that went beyond individual accomplishment. She thought of the dozens of Marines she had already trained, many of whom were now serving in operational units around the world. Some had been deployed to combat zones where the skills she had taught them were quite literally saving lives. Others were becoming instructors themselves, extending the reach of the lessons even further. Lance Corporal Kim had been one of her greatest success stories. The young Marine had overcome her initial confidence issues and was now consistently shooting at levels that would have been considered impossible just a few years earlier. More importantly, she was displaying the kind of leadership and character that would make her an exceptional instructor in her own right. "I've been thinking about retiring," Miguel said suddenly, his voice carrying a note of humor despite his condition. 40 years after leaving the Corps, I think my teaching days are done." Sarah looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean? You don't need me anymore, Mija. You've become the teacher now. Everything I had to give you, I gave you. Now it's your turn to give those lessons to others." The realization hit Sarah with unexpected force. Her grandfather was right. She had indeed become the teacher. The scared little girl who had needed his guidance and wisdom had grown into a Marine Corps instructor whose influence would extend far beyond her own achievements. Miguel passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by family and holding Sarah's hand. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including many Marines who had driven from bases across the country to pay their respects to a man they had never met but whose influence on Sarah had touched their lives as well. Master Gunnery Sergeant Williams, Sarah's first instructor at sniper school, delivered a eulogy that captured Miguel's legacy perfectly. Miguel Santos served his country with honor in Vietnam, but his greatest service came after he took off the uniform. Through the lessons he taught his granddaughter, he has influenced the training and development of thousands of Marines who will carry his values forward for generations. The weeks following Miguel's funeral were difficult for Sarah, but she found comfort in her work. Training new Marines, seeing their skills develop and their confidence grow, felt like the most fitting tribute she could offer to her grandfather's memory. One morning, while reviewing training records at Quantico, Sarah received a call that would mark another milestone in her career. Colonel Mitchell, who had overseen her record-setting performance at Camp Pendleton, was on the line with unexpected news. "Martinez, how would you feel about taking on a new challenge?" he asked. "The Corps is establishing a new center of excellence for advanced marksmanship, and we need someone to lead the instruction program. The job is yours if you want it." The position would make Sarah one of the youngest Marines ever to hold such a senior instructional role. She would be responsible for developing training programs that would be used throughout the Marine Corps, and her decisions would directly influence the preparation of thousands of Marines. "Sir, I'm honored by the offer," Sarah replied. "But I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to make sure that every Marine who comes through our programs understands that marksmanship is about more than just hitting targets. I want them to learn the values and discipline that make excellent Marines, not just excellent shooters." Colonel Mitchell laughed. "Martinez, that's exactly why we want you for this job. When can you start?" 6 months later, Sarah stood before a new class of Marines at the newly established Center of Excellence, preparing to deliver her opening remarks to students who would become the next generation of Marine Corps marksmanship instructors. "Marines," she began, "you are here because someone believes you have the potential to become not just exceptional marksmen, but exceptional leaders. Over the next several weeks, you will learn techniques and skills that represent the pinnacle of Marine Corps marksmanship training." She paused, looking out at the eager faces before her, seeing in them the same mixture of nervousness and determination she had felt years earlier. "But I want you to understand something from the very beginning. The most important lessons you learn here won't be about windage calculations or ballistic coefficients. They'll be about discipline, patience, and the character that separates Marines from everyone else." In the back of the classroom, Lance Corporal Kim, now a sergeant, and one of Sarah's assistant instructors, smiled as she heard echoes of the lessons that had shaped her own development. "Marksmanship is a craft that demands everything you have," Sarah continued. "It requires technical skill, physical discipline, and mental toughness. But, most importantly, it requires character. The ability to perform under pressure, to make decisions that affect other people's lives, to represent the Marine Corps with honor in everything you do. She thought of her grandfather's words about gifts meaning nothing without work, about skill without character being dangerous, about the responsibility that came with ability. You will leave here as instructors, and Marines all over the world will depend on the lessons you teach them. Some of those Marines will face life and death situations where the skills you give them will make the difference between coming home and not coming home. The weight of that responsibility was sobering, but Sarah could see in the students' faces that they understood the magnitude of what they were undertaking. "We will push you harder than you've ever been pushed before," she concluded. "We will demand a level of excellence that may seem impossible at first. But I promise you this. If you embrace the challenge, if you commit to the process, you will leave here capable of achievements that you can't even imagine right now." As the students filed out to begin their first practical exercise, Sarah remained behind for a moment, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a little girl learning to shoot tin cans to a Marine Corps instructor whose influence would ripple through generations of Marines, she had traveled a path defined by the values her grandfather had instilled in her. The records she had set would eventually be broken. The shooting achievements that had brought her fame would be surpassed by new generations of exceptional Marines. But the lessons she was now teaching about character, discipline, and excellence, those would endure long after her own career had ended. Walking out to join her students on the range, Sarah felt her grandfather's presence with her, and she knew that the most important part of her story was just beginning. Every Marine she trained would carry forward not just the technical skills of marksmanship, but the values that transformed skilled shooters into exceptional Marines. The little girl who couldn't miss had become the instructor who wouldn't let others fail, and in that transformation lay the true measure of her success. Excellence, her grandfather had taught her, was not about individual achievement, but about lifting others to heights they never thought possible. As she watched her students prepare for their first shots, Sarah smiled, knowing that Miguel Santos would be proud of the teacher his granddaughter had become.